Hello, everybody. Welcome. I deeply appreciate each and every one of you, uniquely, who come here to listen and learn and seek insight with me on these walk and talks. I'm out around sunset for my nightly stroll, and temperature is nice. The atmosphere here is still breathable, thankfully. The humans haven't quite yet dragged us off 17 different cliffs into catastrophe and devastation. I have no idea how long that will continue to be true, or how long I will last. I'm approaching 60, for those of you who don't know, and I've led a relatively difficult and conflicted life, so I'm not really sure how much time is left. But today is one of those days where I'm still alive and relatively healthy, and as usual, I have a lot on my mind. Recent events in the United States have become incredibly conflicted and confusing. I saw this coming more than 20 years ago, probably more than 30 years ago. But that doesn't make it any easier to live in a time when the things that I was concerned about have become the state of affairs, so to speak. And a lot of us are struggling because we are caught up in systems of behavior, thought, politics, war, prisoneering, psyops, and so forth, that we feel pretty helpless to affect. And it's not entirely clear to me whether, or to what degree, it's possible for a small group of committed humans to have a profound effect on our situation, or to change the course that our species seems hell-bent on traversing. But I believe very deeply that it is possible for a small group of humans, tightly interwoven, pursuing noble missions with uncommon intelligence, insight, sensitivity, and awareness, to affect the entire planet, and possibly to even affect it to the degree that it changes the course of our species. And though I have many ideas about how that might be accomplished, it's not my intent to chase those right here today. What I intend to chase today are some insights that occurred to me while I was walking. And they have to do with problems in what we consider to be knowledge. There's a variety of things we could learn and teach each other and discover about our own cognition, our nature, our origin, and our abilities. Abilities intrinsic to human persons and groups that would radically alter everything we had ever thought to be true, and certainly would introduce us to new ways of knowing and new forms of knowledge so profound and staggering, that they would shatter the prison-like illusions that most of us, including myself, live in our day-to-day world. These illusions are very trenchant, and there's a number of reasons why they're trenchant. But perhaps the most fundamental of those reasons is that the milieu in which we presently exist is incredibly compelling, contagious, and powerful. We live in boxes that are mostly empty of life inside, most of us. We are the servants of machines and machine-like processes, corporations, governments, political systems, religious systems, knowledge systems, academia, that are not only impoverished, they are openly toxic. And so, I'm walking on cement, squares. Everywhere around me, I see millions of rectangles and angles and boxes. And that milieu enforces its character on consciousness. In a living place, a forest, the ocean, a jungle, a desert, what we absorb and pay attention to changes dramatically. And if we come from a representational culture and we enter a forest or the ocean or the desert, then we are likely to drag along with us the representational mindset, which is that beings are things. And we photograph, dissect, analyze, and dismiss them. We may momentarily wonder at the beauty of an octopus, or a tiger, an elephant or a whale, a praying mantis or a wasp. But most of us are very unlikely to contact those beings in awareness, consciousness. We will not understand what their existence, like the existence of light or stars or planets, portends or means. Why is it there? Who are they being? What are their missions? These things will remain unknown to us. Most of us will suffer this way due to the entrenched and disabling import of what we call knowledge. And while I will argue that certain forms of mathematical understanding, computational understanding, analytic understanding, biological understanding can be profound and enriching, and can lead certainly to insight, for most of us, most of the time, this is not the case. So that we are likely to think, for example, that the fundamental mission of an organism is reproduction. Right? And I'm not saying that's not part of the situation. What I'm saying is that's a cruelly impoverished understanding of the nature of organisms, their origins, existence, abilities, sensitivities, awareness, consciousness, sentience, and relationships. in a sense, or an array of senses, what we have isn't actually knowledge. We have something resembling a disease that masquerades as knowledge, and the features of this disease are peculiar and difficult to understand the origins of. This disease proceeds by naming, by tokenization, and what ends up happening is when we know a word for something, for example, right now I am at the San Joaquin Delta on a boat launch, surrounded by water and various kinds of floating vegetation. When we learn the words for things, we are inclined to suppose we then know what they are, which is, of course, impossible. I was listening yesterday to an old interview with Richard Feynman, the Nobel laureate physicist, and he was relating an anecdote from his youth in which his father said, do you know what that is? And they were looking at something we might call a ruby-throated thrush, I believe. And he made up some words for the name of this creature in various languages. I'm pretty sure those words were nonsense. He was like, in German, they call it Goschenschnank. In Japanese, Akatapitsots, right? Actually, that sounded more like Blackfoot. In Russian, such and such. In Chinese, some word, and so on, for 18 different languages or something. And his dad said to him, you may know all the words for that bird in every language on earth. It will not help you understand what you're looking at, its nature, its character, its awareness. He may not have used these words. Its origin, its missions, its relationships. And so Feynman learned very early that the tokens we use to refer to phenomena carry not only little value, they can destroy our inherent curiosity, wonder, awe, explorations, discoveries. Because once we learn the word, we think we know something. But the word carries no information. It's simply a token. And so what happens is when we learn the word, our wonder and curiosity, our questing, tends to go silent, right? It tends to be deadened. I often tell a story where a young child is going to school with his mother, and he sees some birds and becomes very excited. Mom, Mom, the birds, the birds. And every day as they pass them, his excitement may diminish. But one day, his mother, in this anecdote, says, honey, those are just sparrows. And he's like, sparrows? And she says, yes. And so the next day he says, Mom, the sparrows. And then the day after that, hey, Mom, there's the sparrows. And the day after that, he no longer remarks on the presence of the birds. His enthusiasm has died away into what we think of as knowledge. Now, this isn't all that knowledge is, but this is one of the fundamental problems with the way that we think and how we teach our children to use language. There's some fundamentally profound problem with our species, language, and knowledge. When I was younger, because I was pretty well read, when someone would mention something, perhaps, oh, hello. Wow. You're in a strange place. I think I may have to pause and relate with this praying mantis here. I'll be back. I don't think I know what it is just because I know the word. I'm always concerned about the mantises if they are in a place where they are easily noticed by humans. Many of the humans do not respond well to living creatures in general, and perhaps somewhat less so to praying mantises. But in this case, this one was watching the sunset atop a sort of a cut-off log. And although I could have moved it to a more suitable location, I decided not to. I decided that it is capable of dealing with its situation intelligently, which is almost certainly true. So this problem with tokens, words, names, and the way that we are inclined to dismiss their reference once we've learned the words. I'll come back to this in a moment. When I was younger, as I was saying previously, because I was well read, I would often recognize the names of authors or perhaps scientists or maybe philosophers. And so I was inclined to pretend that if I was aware of the words, if I had heard the word or the name previously, then I was inclined to pretend that I knew what the other person was talking about. And I guess, I sort of understand what I was doing. I was trying to appear to be intelligent. Evening. But obviously that kind of behavior is pretty much the opposite of intelligence. Because instead of saying, I don't know, I would say, I know. And eventually, it took a while. I became critical of my own behavior and realized that this not only was disingenuous and dishonest, this kind of behavior would make me dumber. My friend Ryan Firstiver, who I encourage you to explore on YouTube, sometimes teaches me of traditions from Blackfoot culture, a blessing for which I am very grateful, because their ways of knowing are fundamentally relational and incredibly profound in their capacity to preserve intelligence in the face of language and relationships in the face of knowledge. And he explained to me that it is traditional in their culture, when asked particularly about the stories that some of their ceremonial and social traditions orbit. It is traditional when someone asks you, oh, do you know, for example, the story of Scarface? To say no, I do not. Whether you have heard it before or not. And in our culture, we have the opposite tradition. We are particularly inclined, if a person has told us a story before, to tell them, to interrupt them and say, you told me this already. Why might we choose the other position? Well, for one thing, different people in different situations may tell unique features the Opspini are flying over, the white cheeks, what we call Canadian geese. Opspini is their name in Blackfoot. It's one of the few words I've learned. Even if we are listening to the same person telling a story, a traditional story that in English we might call a myth, the circumstances of the telling are new. The situation is not the same as it was in previous tellings. And both the person telling it and those who may be listening are not the same people they were the last time. And to hear a story many times from, oral traditions, right? We're not talking about written traditions, though it's also true in those. I'll get to that in a moment. If we say, I know the story, it's first of all kind of rude. And it presumes that everything that could be known about the story is known by us, which certainly cannot be the case. If it's a very simple story, such as a dog named Shep chased a ball and caught it and brought it back to its master, well, in that specific case of such an incredibly simple story, we may not learn much by hearing it over and over again. But in the case of the story of Scarface, we will learn something new every time we hear it, for many different reasons that are crucially important to preserve. So it's not merely a matter of being polite. They seem to understand in their traditional knowledge this problem with knowledge. And to have traditions that allow them to circumvent the collapse of intelligence, awareness, curiosity, wonder, sacredness, relationship that so easily takes place when we think we know something. These days, if someone asks me, have you heard of Eric Weinstein? Okay, I will say, yes, I've heard of Eric Weinstein and I've listened to him for a good 10 or 15 hours. What do you know about Eric? Or what would you care to share? Let's discuss this. But if they say, do you know of Schopenhauer? I will say very honestly, I've heard his name a number of times in my life. I have not read anything by Schopenhauer. I don't really know Schopenhauer. And if they say something that I have only heard the word, then I will admit that. I have heard the name, but I know nothing of it. And this is a far preferable behavior to my old, somewhat arrogant way of listening and speaking with others. But you see that I was also subject to this specific problem, right? That, oh, if I know the word, then I know enough. I have knowledge. I am one who has knowledge. What a tragic situation for me and those speaking with me. I'm much humbler these days. And I don't trust knowledge. What I trust is curiosity, wonder, insight, awareness, learning, aching to see beyond what has already been known. I don't want to live in the cognitive graveyard of names and tokens the way most of my people do. Ever again. So I'm very concerned about these problems in knowledge. And what I was thinking that led to this discussion was, it is not knowing that is the beginning of actual understanding, insight, awareness, and something more like knowledge in the intimacy of curious and wonderful relation with phenomena, including the phenomena of our own mental experience. If we could actually set aside the 10,000 train cars of what we know, the locomotive of our awareness would explode into wonder. It is not easy for me to do this, but there are experiences that remind me of this. A sunrise or a sunset, a praying mantis, the calls of the birds in the sky, the stars, music, dance, love, creativity, play, all of these things. They unclothe the strange disease that normally inhibits my awareness. We seem to believe commonly, popularly, that humans are intelligent. At the species level, we certainly are not. Something seems to happen to us in groups, as if we are captured by malignant processes. There are beautifully intelligent and insightful and curious individuals, and sometimes they form groups, and then things get really interesting. But alone in my everyday life, I am not a fountain of insight. Give me one curious person to speak and relate with when my insight mind begins to awaken. But when I am alone, I am inclined to fall into the habits that plague us humans. Beep, bop, boop mind. This thing, that thing, okay, next. Task, chore, operation. And it's like being a zombie or like being dead inside. I'm not a fan. Recently, in our country, the concept of UFOs, aliens, and so on, and most likely whatever UFOs usually are, they probably are not merely beings from another planet who are more technologically advanced than us. We seem to think that machines are evidence of intelligence. Well, machines are what will get our species dead, possibly right quick. So, if you have a technological species, the most important forms of intelligence are knowing what not to build and why. No one properly understood, and no one does understand, the implications of guns. Once we invented them, we became them en masse. The existence of guns rips our world and the ecologies to shreds all day, every day. And the possibilities of war eat up, good evening, probably, well, a vast portion of resources, an unjustifiable, ridiculous, absurd insanity of resources. Every day, every hour, every moment. Right? And what is meant by resources is itself insane, because living places and beings are not resources to be converted to weapons or commodities, any more than the organs of our own bodies are. I always intuitively understood something similar to this, even from childhood, but it was very difficult to achieve a perspective where I could articulate it clearly. That took some non-human help, in my case. Although, even before that, I had begun to understand that the earth is a being, a transcendent being, and that the ecologies are incredibly, unimaginably precious. If you were a spacefaring, intelligent species, you would know this. Living planets, whether they are common over vast distances of time-space, are incredibly uncommon in local areas, and they change the nature of time-space in the areas they exist. I've often said you could point your finger at the sky, follow that line for 1,000 light years, and you won't find a single bee. You won't find anything with biological bodies, or not much. You certainly won't find billions of complex, anciently evolved species in a hypersystem together. If you made that line into a disk, if you spun it 360 degrees, you still probably wouldn't find anything very complex in terms of physical organisms out there. And if you made it a sphere, now you'd have a shot. but you might find that most living worlds have trouble with stability, so that very complex life forms are uncommon even on planets capable of sustaining life. But what I was thinking is that the direction toward insight is almost the opposite direction of knowledge. We think more knowledge is better. There are features that, some features of that proposition make sense, but it depends on many other features, such as why are we seeking knowledge? What are the purposes that motivate our quests? Obviously, the noblest purposes produce the most beautiful results. Well, what makes a purpose noble? It isn't analytical precision. It isn't the ability to make new kinds of machines. What makes a purpose noble is that all beings benefit from its pursuit. They actually benefit. Our ancestors benefit. The living planet benefits. Dead people benefit. Unborn people benefit. And not just people, but all of the peoples. All of the different kinds of beings benefit. Unfortunately, at the group level, our species has lost its compass. We will build anything that can be built, and we will use what can be built to kill. Under no circumstances can that possibly be noble. Someday soon, I'll write an essay about this topic, which I may have mentioned in previous recordings, which is that I believe that scientific research is fundamentally unethical. And the reason that I believe it is unethical is that while the pursuit of understanding and knowledge can be noble, it cannot be noble in any situation where the societies in which the knowledge emerges utilize it for malignant purposes that are fundamentally against life or omnicidal. Right? Everything killing. And that's most of what the humans do with scientific knowledge, because actual research that was ethical and useful would first realize that you don't, as Frederick Brown once wrote in a story called The Weapon, you don't give a loaded gun to a 2-year-old child to play with. We have failed to develop intelligent societies, so the first order of necessity is that. And until we've developed societies intelligent enough to know what not to build, we must not give the findings of science to the societies that presently exist. Anyone with a modicum of awareness should be able to see that this proposition is crucial to the survival of life on Earth, never mind the scientific endeavor. Now, this is a very radical position with which some small cohort of persons might agree. But to me, it seems fundamentally obvious. You don't give new technologies to corporations or governments that are formally insane and incapable of navigating paths on living planets that lead to benefit for all beings. Until we have such societies, I would argue, it is unethical to deliver scientific findings to them. They will be weaponized in nearly every case. So the most urgent imperative for humans is the establishment of societies that are not merely sustainable, but that are founded on principles that are wise and true and noble. I suspect that the very confused founders of the nation in which I was born, the United States, had principles like this that at least resembled it in mind when they forged the nation out of the catastrophically ironic colonization of the Americas. They were young and ignorant in many ways, but they had at least principles, however misguided some of them may have been, that inclined them to hope for a society that was altruistic, egalitarian, and sustained the possibilities of human intelligence in social structures and relationships. What a strange mess has emerged from those hopes in our time. But back to the founding idea of my talk tonight. What is not known, and literally not knowing, opens us to the possibilities of insight, and this is what Richard Feynman was talking about in part of the interview that I heard. He was a big fan of what he called new ideas, by which he meant new perspectives, new ways of seeing, new ways of relating, new forms of understanding, and new methods to chase that understanding together. And I do believe in that, though maybe belief is the wrong word. I find that exciting and human and worthy of pursuit, as long as the purposes that underlie our quests are noble. And by noble, obviously, I mean fundamentally virtuous, not in a puritanical way that goes around judging every sin, every missing of the mark, but rather in a way that discovers and enacts new features of the possibility of our humanity that are beautiful, obviously good, and not omnicidal. The unknown. The knowledge we have acquired as a species, which is now nearly at our fingertips to a degree through the auspices of artificial intelligence, a situation that I feel will almost certainly lead to incredible kinds of danger and catastrophe. Not because AI is dangerous, but because human purposes are generally malignant. But it is a new world for us because, hello, we now have at our fingertips access to systems that have condensed the entire field of human knowledge, not completely, but broadly, into an accessible form. That is a profoundly provocative and potentially beneficial technology. However, as usual, we don't know what the dangers are, and we're going to build it anyway. Right? I doubt we've discovered the actual dangers of atomic weapons. Some, 70 years later. We think that the blast radius and the fallout and the radiation are the primary dangers for humans. But we haven't ever considered, for example, that converting some large swath of the surface, the air, and the underground of the earth to energy over a few seconds probably damages time and is insane because it omnicidally kills everything in the radius. So it's not just the blast or the explosion or the 1,000 years of fallout or 10,000 years, depending on the half-life of the products. There's all kinds of dangers we're not aware of, and similarly, we have no idea as a species whether the Large Hadron Collider might cause damage to things we don't even know exist, and that it's a bad idea to build such devices and operate them on a living planet. Might be okay, it might, and it might not, be less insane if we did it in space. But I suspect that even then there would be dangers that we're not aware of. And we don't really know if computation does anything worse than eat up a lot of energy and produce a lot of heat, and I would argue that it probably does. So this is another feature of the unknown. Our species builds technologies without the ability to see into their implications or sequelae in time. Are guns a good thing? Seems unlikely to me. In fact, one of the things they do is they change time very dramatically by causing a projectile, which is a feature of time-space, to be suddenly accelerated, often resulting in an impact between that projectile and living beings. The shock kills them, the damage kills them, the lead in the environment kills them. Seems like a pretty stupid idea to me. It's almost as if the humans are so insane that they're trying to bring a vacuum to the surface of our world. But yeah, so that's the other side of the unknown. We build machines, devices, and technologies with no understanding of their consequences and no way of acquiring that understanding other than by implementing the technologies. And once they are implemented, when have we stopped making them? Right? Once we're capable of building a car, it becomes parasitic to us and the world for the sake of what we think of as convenience. And it is very convenient. But what's the downstream damage? And how many domains of damage are there? In recent videos, I discussed a strange realization, which was that when I encounter something that I don't know what it is, and most often for me this is a life form, but we can also have this experience in dreaming or in hypnagogia or hypnopompia, in sleep paralysis, in out-of-body experiences, perhaps in lucid dreaming or astral projection. But usually what I mean when I say this is when I encounter something that I don't know what it is while I'm awake, I suddenly don't know what I am. Because apparently what I am is dependent mostly on knowing what it is that's around me or in front of me or I'm attending. And I found that very shocking. Not to mention that when I encounter something I don't know what it is, particularly if the phenomena appears very busy, then my first response is usually fear. And maybe that's why humans are generally not particularly friendly to small organisms such as mantises or spiders or snakes, because they don't know. They know the name of the thing, but they don't really understand the being in front of them. There was a Zen teacher in Sonoma County who became famous for a phrase, "Only don't know." And by this phrase, he points in the direction of actual insight, which is the freedom from the stultifying structure of names, comparisons, declarations, language, tokens, systems, and so forth. Our consciousness is dragging this 10,000 train cars along of our history and knowledge and language and naming and so forth. And if it were to be suddenly unencumbered by that, what might we be capable of understanding or seeing? The weight, the incredible energetic cost of sustaining that structure is so profound that it eventually, in childhood usually, evicts dreaming from our waking world experience. What would it be like to be free of that for even a few moments? Sometimes when I encounter something that I don't know what it is, it's as if it suspends the whole charade. For a moment, I am a child again, in wonder and awe, in fear, in fascination, in curiosity. And perhaps then I may have a shot at something resembling actual understanding. But usually what happens with my waking mind is it collapses the manifold of identity piece by piece until it produces a token. Ah, that is a cricket. It's just doing a very strange thing that I've never seen a cricket do before. Something that actually happened to me. I certainly had no idea what I was looking at. The cricket was hovering over the carpet in the hallway under a lamp, emitting a very strange sound and sort of making hover patterns above the carpet, and mostly it was blurry. It was so blurry and fast I couldn't really tell what the hell the phenomena was, though I pretty quickly presumed it to be an insect of some kind. How surprising when it finally slowed down and what appeared before me from the blur was a cricket. Perhaps of a kind I hadn't seen before, but a cricket nonetheless, right? I know where in the catalog of categories, it fits, and that's what usually happens, right? I would suspect that we're missing 99% of available experience just based on the incredible cost of having to sustain representational cognition in consciousness. And so the real undiscovered country isn't far away. It's not in space. And I suspect very strongly that everything that might be in space is actually in us, accessible right here, right now, in and as our bodies and minds, if we could find a way to release the structure, to unclothe consciousness of its representations. Lately in the US, there's been a lot of talk in some circles about UFOs and aliens. And I've made a few videos on this topic. But one of the things I've heard from people who have had contact with NHIs, and I am such a person, but from others, is that they are waiting for us to understand the difference between what we think about space-time and what it really is. That's going to be a long wait. I mean, that's almost a joke. I doubt our species will survive long enough to understand the nature of time-space, though there are wise humans on Earth, probably including all of our babies, that have a direct memory of the beyond of physical existence and come to birth and embodiment with this memory, which unfortunately tends to fade in proportion to their representational skill with words and writing and math and so on. And there are brilliant, amazingly altruistic, and profoundly intelligent humans, most of whom will be found many of whom will be found in religious traditions, but not on the surface of these traditions, rather at their core. Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Dogen Zenji, many women and men, and some children have achieved escape velocity, not from the gravity of our planet, but from the gravity of representational cognition. And so have explored deeply the nature of origin, actual intelligence, other intelligences, the living places, the plants and animals and creatures and fishes and mountains, the great world forest, the moon. They have explored not by forging technologies, but by escaping the need for machines altogether. Would that their wisdom was more contagious than our problems. Nonetheless, they are lighthouses that we can learn with by following, with curiosity and wonder, compassion and love. But it is not knowledge that we need. We sort of need the opposite of knowledge, or a superposition beyond it, that I usually use the word insight to point towards. And insight, I do chase it. I have various quests that I'm in love with. And I'm in love with the living planet, and light, and time, and all of the great questions. But I need intelligent others to pursue them with, though I will continue my quests even if I cannot find them in my daily life. Nonetheless, I hope to. And if you are one of them, then let us quest together. Whether we are together or apart, we can chase the big questions of birth and death and origin, time and light, mathematics, understanding, insight, awareness, dreaming, creativity. My walk is nearly at an end, and so for now, my dear companions, I will wish you a beautiful way, a beautiful day, exquisite dreaming, discovery, togetherness, play, health, long life, and prosperity. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye for now.